What is up, everybody? I'm NoLucksGiven here with your afternoon snap, and today we're going to be taking a look at this week's Community Gaming SEA tournament, which was won by Denny Praise with a really cool new combo. That's probably the thumbnail of this video, but before we get to that, I'm going to do a full look at the top 4 of this event, and then after that we'll take a look at the entire metagame and break that down. But first, let's take a look at the 4th place deck list here from NiTheal, playing Junk. Junk decks now have access to Hawkeye, Kate Bishop, the newest Season Pass card for Marvel Snap, and her Acid Arrow allows you to further junk up your opponent's locations and potentially completely lock them out of one or multiple locations depending on what they're playing and what locations you have that game. So that is obviously really good for this strategy. And the other thing that I think is really interesting and new and noteworthy is that this list is not running a single card that costs more than 3 energy. This is practically a Silver Surfer deck with how many 3-cost cards that there are, and there's some really powerful 3-cost cards in this deck. Loki and Cassandra Nova, I actually just made a video and deck on yesterday alongside Grandmaster. Those are really powerful on reveal abilities, and triggering those multiple times can be game winning, even though that's not related to anything else the deck is trying to do. But Grandmaster allows you to re-trigger some cards, Beast allows you to re-trigger cards, mostly White Widow and then the Hood or Viper are what those cards are going for, but those cards can also re-trigger Cassandra Nova and Loki, and with all of these on reveals bouncing and moving around and replaying, you can make an absolutely massive Werewolf by Night with this deck. Also worth noting that Hawkeye, Kate Bishop, is an on-reveal card that potentially adds multiple on-reveal cards to your hand, similar to Beast, which means that that is also contributing to making a rather large Werewolf by Night. We also saw a buff recently to Viper, which now makes your lowest power card switch sides. We also saw a nerf to White Widow and the ongoing ability of the Widow's Kiss, but that almost doesn't really matter in this deck because you're trying to get a 0/0 Widow's Kiss. Ideally, the nerf is like totally irrelevant because you're using White Widow to lock your opponent out of a location rather than caring about the negative power of the ongoing ability. So that really doesn't matter that much, and the buff to Viper is big. It allows you to play other cards in your locations like Loki or even Cassandra and not have to worry about those cards flying over to your opponent's side. Sometimes there's some awkwardness with I'll say there was some awkwardness with Viper and Werewolf by Night because it's a card that is moving around in different locations and just means that you couldn't play the Hood plus Viper in a turn as a setup plus donate. But now you can do basically anything you want to do with this deck, and Nico helps that be possible. That's the only card I haven't really talked about here. I don't know, there's a lot to talk about and a lot of interesting synergies. So in my video yesterday, I brought this up already, but I talked about the strength of Grandmastering Loki. This deck can also Beast your Loki, and activating Loki, Loki draws a card. That is a really rare effect in Marvel Snap for good reason because it's a pretty powerful effect. So that's obviously really great. Nico can also potentially draw you some cards sometimes, and that is probably the mode that you are looking for the most on Nico, but you're also playing it because you can bounce it with Beast, and it's one of the best 1-cost cards in the game. So all of that is really sweet. One other thing that I wanted to mention is that when Junk is a deck, right? There are cards that are good against Junk, and this deck is playing some of them while also being a Junk deck. And the main card that comes to mind here is Viper because you can pass your cards to your opponent, but a main card that is not in this deck is Cersei and Annihilus because we're stopping the curve at 3. However, you can still use Beast to bounce the Widow's Kiss, the Green Goblin, and the Acid Arrow if one of two things happen. Either your opponent sends them to you, or you are unable to send them to your opponent because your locations are full and then you can't switch sides. That doesn't count for the Widow's Kiss, but it does count for the Viper and the Green Goblin and the Acid Arrow. So Beast and then also Grandmaster to be able to return those things to your hand and then potentially replay them and re-trigger their on-reveal abilities is really cool. There's also a lot of really unique interactions with Werewolf by Night that come up in how it's useful with Grandmaster. I already brought up Hawkeye Kate Bishop. There's also interesting ways to use Werewolf with Beast and Green Goblin. You can play Green Goblin as your 4th card in a location, pass it to your opponent, and then have Werewolf by Night move into that location. So there's some really cool stuff going on in this list with Cassandra just at the just as a good 12th card that is good to re-trigger with all of these extra on-reveal cards. So really, really cool deck list here from NiTheal, and honestly, it makes me excited to play Hawkeye Kate Bishop. And I talked about all of these cards like having multiple modes and multiple play lines. You're playing Hawkeye Kate Bishop and Nico Minoru, which is really cool, and I definitely thought that Kate Bishop would find her home in a Beast bounce deck, but I didn't realize it would be a Beast bounce deck that also incorporates so much cool junk stuff. White Widow, I don't know, might just prove to be too strong at 2 energy. Filling up your opponent's location for only 2 energy might be good, might just be too good because you can play White Widow and then turn 3 Beast and bounce it. Yeah, that seems like it might be problematic, but for right now, this deck list looks like I think it's going to be the go-to list for Kate Bishop. In 3rd place, we have Grandis with Silver Surfer. Kind of fitting that Silver Surfer took 3rd place, and I don't think that we have seen a Silver Surfer deck list top 4 in a little bit, to be honest. Silver Surfer's really popular. I've played a ton of it, but tournament players tend not to gravitate towards this archetype. There isn't typically that much interaction in Silver Surfer deck lists, though Grandis has found some room for Rogue, Red Guardian, Copycat, and arguably even Absorbing Man, copying that Red Guardian, and Cassandra Nova if you are up against an Arishem list. That's some interaction. Instead, we see Magic and no Nocturne. That is one notable omission from this list. And Magic is a card that I think has been really risky to play because there have been a lot of Nocturnes in these tournaments recently, though we have seen that Nocturne stock start to decline as some players pick up Copycat. And that could mean that shields are down for people to grab their swords and head into limbo with Magic. So it could be reasonable to try to make that work here, and that's what Grandis is going for, at least in part. I'm really curious when we do the metagame breakdown in just a moment to see how many players actually played Nocturne in this event and how many did well with it, considering that, yeah, this might be a good call because of that. So outside of that, it's a pretty straightforward take on Silver Surfer, going for the Gwenpool variant of the deck, which I think has been more popular recently as opposed to like Wong and Mystique and Odin, which I will always have a fondness for because you're able to do like some really cool big things, but certainly that makes the deck a lot more disruptible as opposed to this one, which is reasonably flexible. Of course, Cosmo still gonna stop you for the most part, no real way of getting around that. Cosmo really good against the last deck too, huh? Okay, yeah. Cosmo stock might need to get raised a little bit, but everybody wants to play sweet on-reveal abilities. Nobody wants to be playing Cosmo. Makes sense. Silver Surfer, don't think I have too much more to say about this deck outside of that. Yeah, that's it. In second place, we have Vinjez pledging their loyalty to Arishem, and there's some unique cards in this deck list. which is always cool to see. Odin is, I would say, sort of a new inclusion in Arishem if I didn't show off my deck with both Odin and Arishem in yesterday's video, but that makes me kind of uniquely positioned to talk about Odin in Arishem because this is not a card most people are playing in their Arishem decks, but it's very good. There's a lot of on-reveal abilities in Marvel Snap, as we saw when we looked at the previous 2 deck lists, and Odin is just a really, really powerful effect to be able to get additional value. You can turn 5 Odin, and you can use it on your Cassandras and your Juggernauts and your Lokis, and even Cable and Agent Coulson if you're Odining on turn 5 to continue to get additional value on that final turn of the game with that card generation. So this is, I think, a really cool card just in general, and that's one of the secrets of the Arishem deck list that I put out yesterday. It was very combo oriented. I brought up, actually these last 3 deck lists have all included a card from the thumbnail so far with Odin, Absorbing Man, and Grandmaster. But the trick to all of those cards is that those are just good cards when you have the ability to double down on an effect that you have already used in the game. So whether you wind up randomly generating from Arishem cards that the deck would already play, or you draw these cards, or you take some of your opponent's Loki cards and like use Odin to re-trigger a Silver Surfer. A lot of those things can be really, really powerful, and I think that, yeah, Odin's a little bit of a sleeper in Arishem deck lists because it's just synergistic with like most cards in Marvel Snap. Being able to re-trigger Juggernaut is cool. There's a few ways that you can curve out. Like I said, you can like Juggernaut on turn 4 and 5, or turns 3 and 5. Or you could Juggernaut on turns 5 and 6. That's a pretty big commitment to play to the same locations on your final 2 turns. And speaking of that, this deck also has Alioth, and I think one of the things that I'm trying to kind of talk about a little bit here with Odin, but it's kind of a tough concept to talk about how cards work in Arishem because you aren't seeing half of the deck list here. You aren't seeing those random 12 cards that Arishem generates, but with the additional energy that Arishem generates, it can be pretty easy to grab priority in Arishem deck list. So rather than looking at Alioth as like a combo card with Odin, I think it's just good to look at Odin as just a good card and Alioth as just a good card, and Juggernaut and Rogue and Cassandra and Loki and Shang-Chi. All of these are just good cards, and that's kind of what Arishem does best when it's not leeching and Darkhawking to scam people. Just play a bunch of good cards, you'll have extra energy to be able to do so, and Quinjet will also kind of help you cheat on energy, and if you're cheating on energy, you're kind of cheating, and you can do some good work in Marvel Snap. So yeah, without bringing anything as exciting to the table as my deck list yesterday, I think that this deck still brings some exciting inclusions with Juggernaut and Odin, and could potentially be a really solid Arishem list. I mean, it got second place, so definitely a really solid way to play Arishem right now. And taking first place in this event, we have Denny Praise on Darkhawk. No surprise that Darkhawk was able to beat Arishem in the finals, but there are some surprises in this deck list. There's some cards that we're used to seeing alongside Darkhawk as well, with the typical Rocks package, and also Black Bolt plus Stature, which are commonly seen alongside Darkhawk. And to be honest, I've never understood why, because Black Bolt makes your opponent discard their cheapest card, and typically that's just going to be a rock from Korg or Rock Slide. So I've always felt that there was just an awkward overlap in those abilities until this deck list from Denny Praise. Typically, Black Bolt is supplemented by Silver Samurai as an additional way to get Samurai costing cheap. Denny has instead opted for Moon Knight. And what is so cool about this deck list is there are no even cost cards except Proxima Midnight. So Moon Knight is either not going to discard anything from your hand and just be an asymmetrical discard effect, or it's going to discard your Proxima Midnight and give you a free 7 power at your lowest power location. That is so cool. And it completely justifies the inclusion of Black Bolt plus Stature, because of course Moon Knight is another way to give yourself a cheap stature, but also because these cards allow you to output a bunch of power while being odd cost cards. And that is just awesome and a really unique. I have not seen anybody else doing this with just Moon Knight and Proxima Midnight in an otherwise odd deck. I think that's super cool. We also see Viper plus the Hood, which is not really super synergistic with the other cards. We also have Nico to get rid of the Hood, which is all fine. But why these cards are all seeing play here is because they're a little bit of a combo and they're an odd cost. And these are just the best 11 odd cost cards that you can be playing, plus Proxima Midnight. And I think that's a really cool dedication to a sort of interesting building restriction that Moon Knight can now facilitate. And I think that's really cool. I think that there might potentially be some ways to innovate on this deck list, but I'm only saying that because this is like something brand new. I can't think of a way to make this deck better. And I think that this deck is really cool, really good. And yeah, just awesome. I mean, I'm just super impressed. You can kind of tell I'm at a little bit of a loss for words here, but I think that this is really cool. And I guess that's it. I'm also going to do a full breakdown of the entire tournament's metagame, and you can find a link to this spreadsheet in the video description if you want to follow along or look at the data yourself and let me know anything that you found that you feel is interesting. We can also look at all of the top 16 deck lists real quick. I won't showcase all of them, but there are 2 more Silver Surfer deck lists and then 2 more Arishem deck lists to round out I believe these are Arishem, right? Yeah. 2 more pretty similar looking Arishem deck lists to round out the top 8. And then we've got another Arishem deck list. Looks like a Cersei deck list. Yeah, that's sort of interesting. Okay, cool. And yeah, it's Cersei, but not Arishem. And then is this Mill deck? I don't see the Baron Zemo. Oh no, this is like Cersei plus Sentry. Interesting. Not totally sure what that deck is doing. We've got a Blue Marvel Patriot list. This list has been seeing a lot of play recently. And then we have 2 different Phoenix Force lists and 2 more Arishem lists that round out the top 16. I went through and I ordered the top 16. Anything after that is all just random. So yeah, don't after this point, I guess you know what I should do? Doing it live here. There you go. Everything below that is not part of the top 16. And I also broke down the top 16 right here. And we can also look at the total numbers that all cards appear, or how many times each card appears is maybe a better way to word that. So Cassandra Nova, no surprise, that was the most played card in this tournament alongside Shang-Chi, and they both made up half of the top 16 deck lists. But Cassandra Nova improved a little bit more from there with 6 in the top 8, and then of course all 4 of the top 4 deck lists that I just showcased all had Cassandra in them. There was a lot of Arishem still and that's why we saw a lot of Cassandra. And what else is interesting here to talk about? A decent amount of Goliath. I guess a lot of Arishem players without Dr. Octopus and Leech have been trying to play Goliath a little bit recently. Shadow King definitely ticking up a little bit, mostly because it's really good against like the Thena and Angela that we've seen. And interestingly, that seems to have really pushed Blob out of the metagame, both because Shadow King is like symmetrical, and when you're Lokiing, if you're Lokiing and stealing your opponent's Shadow King, then that just means Blob is even riskier. I still think Blob is pretty good as a 6/13 with some upside in that it can randomly become like a 6/20 or something. But yeah, not all players agreeing, and we see definitely interesting some cuts on Blob. I think this is a really interesting metric to look at as well, not just total cards in the tournament, but how many of those people made top 16 relative of the total field. Kind of a weird thing to grasp, but for the most part, it's going to show you the cards in order. It kind of like doesn't fairly represent Cassandra in a weird way because just so many people were playing with it. So yeah, it's kind of a weird metric. Maybe just this is a good thing to look at real quick. So yeah, half of the top 8 continuing to play Cassandra and Shang-Chi. Copycat seeing some reasonable play here, and so there's a few things that I know I wanted to highlight. 3 Silver Surfers, we saw that. This, I think, was really noteworthy. All of this. Spider-Ham, Proxima, Moon Knight, not the Legion, but Stature and Black Bolt. All of these were the only copies of these cards played in the tournament. And they were in the winning player's deck list. So that means nobody else is really on to this Moon Knight, Proxima, Midnight combo. And I think it might make some big waves in future weeks. There were some other cards that I wanted to specifically look up here. Oh, you know what is actually kind of cool to look at is negative shifts. What cards did not perform well relative to their metagame position? Mystique did terribly. I don't know why it's not showing up red here, but Mystique was pretty bad, and all of these, yeah, we always see Angela kind of down here at this portion of the event. Only 4 players played Angela, but really interesting that it did not work out. Marvel Boy also did not work out. That was one of the things I was going to directly search. We can see the blue Marvels in general not really working out, so that includes both the Patriot lists and the Marvel Boy lists. Both of them, the Blue Zoo and the Red, White, and Blue Zoo, both of those not really working out too well. And the other card that is the newest card here, Kate Bishop, not actually that bad. Only 5 players played it. Only one of them made top 16 and of course won the entire tournament. But honestly, this is a pretty low, or no, I'm sorry. It was the first deck list that we looked at, so I threw myself off there. But Kate Bishop got 4th place, not 1st place. Yeah, not many people playing Kate Bishop. I do wonder if we will see more Kate Bishop inclusion, because I do think that NiTheal kind of cracked it and knocked it out of the park here with this Kate Bishop list. So I think we could see more players adapt this in future weeks. And the other thing I was curious about was Cosmo. 2 players playing Cosmo did not do well. Let's see who played Cosmo. Cosmo and Mr. Negative, okay? And Cosmo in a Marvel Boy list. So no good deck lists have tried to incorporate Cosmo this week. But that's also because Cosmo's kind of tough to fit in to those good deck lists, because all the good deck lists want to play on reveal abilities. So that makes it a little bit tough. Record low for Mobius. I would not have caught this if I was not searching out Cosmo and saw Mobius right next to it, but Mobius has in the past been one of the most played cards in Marvel Snap, and guys, come on, it's not like Loki is completely gone. How many people played Loki this week? I mean, certainly less than in the past, but still, Loki's got to be... Oh, are there really just... Wait, what? Oh, okay. So maybe not everyone has realized that Loki is still... Oh, wait, no. No. I see what's happened here. I did not check to make sure that this data was accurate. There were 13 players playing Loki, and turns out it might be the most improved upon card. Yes, okay, by a considerable margin. Loki, only 13 players played Loki, 8 of them. So this is where shift data really starts to look cool. 13 players played Loki, 8 of them made the top 16, which is as much as played Cassandra Nova and Shang-Chi in the top 16, but obviously with Loki as a much lower representation of the total field means that Loki did very, very, very well. And none of the... it stayed consistent there into the top 4 or into the top 8. And how many Lokis did we see in this video? 1, 2, right? Another one in the Arishem list. So yeah, half of them made it into the top 4 as well. I think that Loki is really, really good. Were there any other cards that had a nerf in energy? Leech and Dr. Octopus were 2 cards that I totally forgot about, and those are actually probably worth talking about here a little bit as well, just because they were some recently nerfed cards. Dr. Octopus did pretty well. 3 players played it, and 2 of those players top 16, which is not bad. And I know that the gut reaction from Dr. Octopus is now just a totally different card than it was previously. It used to be just this crazy big haymaker. Now it is like a sort of... I don't even want to say it's like a gladiator. I don't know. It's just like a new card. It's definitely not as powerful as it once was for the role that it previously held. But for the role that it holds now, which is just like a junk card with a reasonable amount of stats, think of it like a White Widow. A White Widow is sometimes a lot of stats and always a junk card. Dr. Octopus is also always a junk card, and also sometimes a lot of stats because it's a 4/8, and if you pull something really terrible for your opponent that they're really not even able to utilize, or like you grab their Shang-Chi, that is all really cool. The one awkward part about Dr. Octopus, and I almost don't even feel like it should work this way, but when Dr. Octopus grabs Blob, that is pretty terrible, and just means that you're letting your opponent get their biggest card out into play. It does mean that you could then Shang-Chi that card, but then you're spending a lot of energy for that, and isn't what the junk decks I think are typically looking to do, but we'll see. Dr. Octopus definitely performing well. Leech, I mean, it performed fine. Only 1 player played it, and they top 16'd. I personally don't think Leech is good at all anymore. It's kind of cool that it's maybe better now against Hela, a little bit more flexible against like the ramping Hela lists, even though Hela hasn't really seen much play recently either. I don't think Leech is going to be super relevant, but what I do think is going to be super relevant is this Moon Knight Proxima Midnight combo. Do we want to call it Night combo? Midnight, and what other cards use Night in them? Moon Knight, Midnight, Misty Knight, Black Knight, and Nightcrawler. Okay, so there are some... Oh, and Werewolf by Night. So there are some other Night cards in Marvel Snap, but yeah, I think that is really, really cool. Oh, and Denny Praise just responded to my DM, and Yes, so many combos in the deck, which I noted for that. So, and they said Moon Knight only discards the Proxima, which we caught on to. I think that is just really, really cool innovation. And yeah, just awesome. So huge shout outs here to Denny Praise. I do think we are going to start to see more of this deck in the future. I'm just so enamored by it because every time I look at Black Bolt in deck lists, I'm like, what the heck is that card doing? But now it is a combo piece twice over because it discards, which allows you to play a cheap stature, but also is a lot of points in a way that cannot get discarded by Moon Knight. So really, really cool, really fun. That's going to be it for me, though, today. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm NoLucksGiven. Peace.